If you're from my generation, you probably grew up watching movies like Land Before Time, Zenon, Gotta Kick It Up, Tru Confessions, and more. And today we're talking to the creative mind behind the stories that we grew up with. We are going to be breaking down Stu's incredible career and asking all the great questions. And of course, if you've got questions that we didn't answer in today's interview, drop those down below, as we will be staying in touch with Stu to make sure we get those answered for you as well. Let's jump in.
Hi, I'm Stu Krieger, screenwriter, novelist, college professor, writer of Land Before Time, Xenon movies, and more.
And I am so excited because my audience loves your movies. I grew up watching Land Before Time. You ripped my heart out with that one. Xenon was one of my favorite series on Disney Channel, and you have written so many different movies. So, how did you get into the world of creating screenplays?
Well, as I have said in other interviews, I was a tiny bit of a freak in terms of I grew up in Rochester, New York, with absolutely no connection to the entertainment industry whatsoever. And from a very early age, first saying I was going to be an actor and later saying I was going to be a writer, it was, that's where I belong. And my family made a vacation trip out here when I was 12 years old, and we were here for 2 weeks. And at the end of the 2 weeks, I went, yeah, I was right. This is my home. This is where I'm supposed to be. So I went to college back east. I graduated. I worked for the summer to earn enough money to drive across country and came to LA.
That's amazing. And so you decided you were going to move to LA, you were going to pursue a life in the movies. How did you come across writing screenplays as what you settled on and what you chose to do with your future?
I think, like I said, even as a little kid, I was a storyteller. And so I was always putting on plays with the neighborhood kids. I was always writing little stories. I wrote what is now an incredibly embarrassing young coming of age novel when I was in high school. So I was always writing. And then when I went to college, my college, which was the State University of New York at Brockport, did not have an actual film program, but they had a communications major. So I was doing journalism, I was doing all kinds of writing exercises, and that was the first place where I had two professors. They happened to have been married to each other, Ron and Sarah Watts, and they were the first people who really said to me, "I think you could do this for a living. I see something here where I think it could happen." And I went, "All right, that's where I'm supposed to be. That's what I'm supposed to do." And like I said, packed up the car and went to LA.
And I love that. I love that they had the foresight to know that you were going to do great things. And we all know that you did end up accomplishing incredible things as you basically informed my childhood. My first introduction to you was Land Before Time. And I really want to talk about this because I adored that movie as a kid. So, where did this concept come from and what was the process like for you?
Yeah, at the time the whole process began for me, I was a writer on Steven Spielberg's Amazing Stories television show. So it was the first, kind of his first toe in the water with television. And we were working on the second season of that. And his head of development came to me and she said, "Steven and George Lucas have had this idea for a very long time about an animated dinosaur movie they want to do. They had other writers on it. They're not really happy with the direction it's going. They want to start over." And one of the things that was really interesting is the head of development, Deb Newmeyer, said, "Stephen and I were having a conversation, and we think you've become a even better writer since you become a dad. And is this a movie you would want to write for them?" And what I say to my students all the time is when Steven Spielberg and George Lucas ask, "Do you want to write a movie for me?" You say yes.
Yes.
You don't ask, "How much am I going to be paid? How long do I have to write it?" You say yes first. Then you ask those other questions. So that was how it began. And I said to them, if you have a draft that you're not happy with, I'd rather not look at that. Let's kind of go back to what you're excited about and what you're really looking for and build from there. And so what I inherited from them was literally a big manila folder that was filled with scraps of ideas that the two of them had kind of scribbled down over the years. And it was things like, dinosaurs walk past a burning volcano, mom gets in a fight with the T-Rex. So it was all these scraps of ideas, and it was basically, now take these and make a story. So it was, the jigsaw puzzle of I sat with that whole folder in front of me and I was moving things around and kind of trying to construct a story that connected those dots. And that's when I went back and pitched to them, and then it evolved from there.
That makes a lot of sense. And I know as you're creating screenplays, it's not a one and done draft. So, how long did it take you to go through and create your first draft of this and then go through the process of refining it? Was this a long process for you or was this relatively quick?
Well, it's a little bit different writing for animation because things are continuing to evolve. And so, two of the things that a lot of folks don't know is once the screenplay is pretty much finalized, the actor's voice recording happens before most of the final animation. So
Mhm.
the animators are working on the storyboards, they're working on pencil tests, they're doing all of their process, but then before anything goes to pen and well, back in Land Before Time, it was still pen and ink and very little computer generation. And before any of that happens, the voices get recorded because it's easier for the actor, I mean, the artist to draw to the voices than the other way around. So the process was more than 2 years, but there was a first draft in about 3 months. And then it just kept evolving through meetings and then discoveries by the artists. And then one of the other things in the final product, Rooter is the older dinosaur who does the narration. And there was 3 or 4 different iterations of what the narration was going to be because Steven's original concept, he wanted to do it more like Fantasia, that it was just going to be dinosaurs didn't speak and it was accompanied by a musical score. And as we got deeper into the process, we kind of started talking, especially if you want a young audience, it's going to be really hard to hold their attention if there's not dialogue and there's not, kind of personalities to the characters more than what you can show without talking.
Mhm.
And so this is something else I've talked about in other interviews, but we would have these absolutely absurd discussions where it's these grown, Steven Spielberg, George Lucas, Don Bluth, his partner, John Pomeroy, Frank Marshall, and Kathy Kennedy, Steven's producing partners, and I sitting around a conference table having these fights about a dinosaur wouldn't say that. And at one point, I actually wrote an article for the Hollywood Reporter entitled "A Dinosaur Wouldn't Say That" about this whole process of trying to work out what and where. And one of the kind of great prides of my life is at the end of the process, the animators gave me 2 original cells from the making of the movie, and both of them involved Littlefoot and the leaves that were the dinosaurs called tree stars.
Yes.
And tree star was kind of something I came up with. And so when the animators were picking 2 cells to give me,
Oh.
both of them involved the tree stars.
Oh, I love that. And so you must have so many great memories from this story. Before we move on, I want you to tell us one interesting thing that you learned, one interesting thing that you experienced during this process.
I think one of the things that started with Land Before Time and carried through all of the Disney Channel movies I did was I really and it goes to what Deb was saying about, having a new appreciation as a father, is I really made sure in all of my family entertainment that I was never talking down to kids. And even at the Disney Channel, I would have these fights with them about I would say something, I mean, I would have a line of dialogue and they would say, "I'm not sure a 9-year-old would say that." And I would say, "Well, my daughter said it at dinner last night."
Yes.
And I would rather have an audience, so many, especially with the Disney Channel movies, the kids would watch them with their parents.
Mhm.
And I would say, I would rather have them turn to their parents and go, "What does that mean?" rather than talk down to them. And so I think that was the thing that really started with Land Before Time, of trusting your audience and trusting even when, like I said, it's for kids, there's an innate intelligence that you have to respect in telling stories for them.
And you mentioned that you actually used your children to inspire some of the things that you've written. Is there anything in particular that your kids would point and say, "That was me. I inspired that inside of your movies"?
Well, I don't think we can get any more spot on than the fact that the second movie I did with Don Bluth was A Troll in Central Park. And if you know the movie, there are 2 little children involved with a troll who lands in Central Park, and they are Gus and Rosie. My son is Gus, and my daughter is Rosie.
Well, there we go. That's kind of perfect. So tell me a little bit about that movie. What was your involvement with that? How did you come into that story? What were your favorite memories from it?
The great thing about that was Don and I had a really wonderful working relationship on The Land Before Time. And so he came to me one day and he said, "I woke up this morning and I had this title in my head, A Troll in Central Park." And there's an old song, A Stroll in Central Park. And
Mhm.
that was kind of what inspired him. And at the time, he said, "What I'm envisioning is maybe a monkey from the Central Park Zoo gets into an adventure with a troll that gets exiled to the park." And I said, "My only bump with that is when you're looking at them visually, kind of a little monkey and a troll are sort of the same size. There's something, size and proportionate. I'm not sure that's the right pairing." And then I started talking about my kids, and he said, "How old are they?" And I said, "Well, one of the things that would be really charming is I've never seen an animated movie with a toddler where they kind of move the way a toddler moves, and they have the loaded diaper and their butts hanging a little low, and and so I said, my daughter's a year and a half and my son is about to turn 5, and I kind of think there's something in that pairing if they had an adventure with a troll in the park." And he said, "Oh, I love that. What are your kids' names?" And that's when I said Gus and Rosie, and he said, "Perfect." And then the other incredible thing was he sent a team of animators down to our house, and they spent the afternoon just filming the kids playing and climbing and doing things in the backyard and watching their movement. And a lot of those, that film is what they used in terms of modeling the characters and designing them to begin with.
And I know with that old school animation where they had to hand draw everything, they really did have to focus on videotapes of actors and actresses and children to really get those movements down. So it's really interesting to see the behind the scenes look of those animated films and how those were actually crafted. But we know, of course, you did not just do animated films. You also did so many of the Disney Channel original movies that we grew up with, my favorite of which being Zenon. So let's talk a little bit about that transition. How is it different to work on these movies from those animated movies?
I'm going to answer your question in 1 minute, but I'm eyeing something on my desk I want to share with you as well before we move on.
Okay.
Which was at the end of production on Troll in Central Park, the animators also build these three-dimensional models so that they can turn them different ways and see different proportions. And so at the end of production, they gave me this, which is Gus and Rosie,
Wow.
and it's
Oh,
signed from the head animator. And
oh,
that
I love it.
one of my great prideful, kind of talismans from my career was Gus and Rosie from Troll in Central Park.
That's fantastic. Oh, I love that they brought your children into these stories and now they have that legacy to live forever. And which is really cool because you also have this incredible legacy of all of your movies. So, with the Disney movies, those are a little bit different than the animated films. Tell me how that differed for you.
Yeah, one of the things that is so much fun about animation is it's really as free as your imagination, as opposed to when you're doing live action, there's always a consideration of budget. How much would it cost to do that? How do we do that? How do we design that? And animation, burning volcano, dinosaur fight, let's do it. So that's the biggest kind of difference in terms of writing for the two medium is just really thinking much more consciously of how is this actually going to be producible if it's a live action film.
Mhm.
And my entree into kind of there was a Disney Channel era that preceded the DCOMs. So the DCOMs were the Disney Channel original movies.
Yeah.
And part of, I believe, my success there was when they started the DCOMs, they were premiering a movie a month. So
Mhm.
the first Friday of every month, there was a new movie coming. So they needed this incredible pipeline.
Yeah.
And I had already done two other movies like I said, the DCOMs. One was the remake of Freaky Friday that was the Gabby Hoffman and Shelley Long version.
Mhm.
And then I also did Parent Trap 2, which was the sequel to the original movie, not the Lindsay Lohan remake, but Haley Mills as an adult. So they knew of me and they knew of my work. But when the DCOMs started happening, I got a call to come in on Xenon. And what that was it was a very thin kids picture book that they sent to me and they said, take a look at the book and come in and pitch us your take on how you would turn this into a Disney Channel original movie. So because the franchise was just beginning, I said to them, and advice to all writers, do your homework. So I said to them, have you made any of the movies yet that I can kind of take a look at to see what you're aiming at? And the only one that was done at that point was Under Wraps, the Mummy movie.
Mhm.
So I said, is there any chance I could take a look at it? And they said, all we have is the rough cut, but we can send you that. So, back in the day, the VHS tape arrived of the rough cut of Under Wraps, and I watched that before I went into the meeting to kind of get a sense of what these movies were going to be all about.
Mhm.
And when I went in, they said, we're going to be very upfront with you. We've already interviewed 19 other writers. We're still looking before we make a final decision. Pitch us your take. And having done the research, having done a couple other movies with them, I said, to me, this book is Eloise at the Plaza on the space station.
Yes.
And if you know that book, it's about a kid who lives at the Plaza Hotel in New York and just gets into all kinds of mischief and is always in the dumbwaiter and under tables and is always creating havoc because of her curiosity. And so, we talked a few more minutes, and at the end of the meeting, they said, "You're hired." And the reason you're hired is 18 of the 19 writers that came in before you pitched some version on It's 90210 meets Star Trek. And they said, at the Disney Channel, we don't do Star Trek, we don't do 90210, we do Eloise at the Plaza on the space station. You're the guy. And so that was how that relationship began. And then, like I said, because they had this incredible need to be producing constant material to be able to do a movie a month. Smart House was a script that already existed in development, but they felt like it was sort of lacking the emotional pass and adding kind of depth to the relationships and the characters. So they said, we're happy with the premise. We're happy with a lot of what goes on in the Smart House. We just feel like it needs the character and emotional pass. Take a look at it. So I did that. And point of pride with my Disney Channel work is I was either the only writer or the last writer on all the movies I did. And the point of pride with the last writer is it means it was your draft that got the green light to put the movie in production.
Right. That makes a lot of sense. And so you have done a lot of movies with Disney. You started on Zenon and you worked on quite a few of them in the follow-up time. And so I want to know, how long did it take you in between writing the 3 Zenon movies? Because there's the sequel and of course there's the 3rd spinoff. Was that something that you did or you knew was going to happen right away? Or was that once they saw the success, they brought you back for those follow-ups?
Yeah. So that was exactly how it rolled out. Is the first movie was supposed to be a one and done. It was an incredible success for them. When they had a party celebrating their first 100 movies that I was at, Gary Marsh, who was the head of the network at the time, said, whenever I'm out and about and people know who I am and want to come up and talk to me about the Disney Channel movies, most people think they're going to talk to me about High School Musical. And he said, that's actually not true. The most questions I get are about Zenon and Smart House. And I went, yeah. All right. So the success of the first one spawned the sequel. If you have been following social media, I had a post about being very outraged that the Chipmunks had the squeakquel after I said I felt very ripped off that I came up with the sequel and then the Chipmunks had the squeakquel. But anyway, so we did the second movie. And then when that was a success, they ordered the third movie, which originally was going to be a feature film released in theaters. But as we were in development on it, there was a power struggle between the studio side and the Disney Channel side over who had ultimate control of the script and of the say. And that kind of ego battle ended up in it blowing up and the channel going, it's our property, we're taking it back. And they made the third movie as a Disney Channel original movie. So if you see it, there are certain things in the third movie that are way too big for the budget we had because it was originally going to be a feature. So some of it's a little bit janky just because they didn't have full-on budget for what we'd written. But, you do what you got to do.
You do what you have to do. And when it comes to that, how much input do you have on the movie creation once the script has been written? Once it goes to film and people are acting and they're doing the recordings, are you around to help tweak things or are they doing it on set without you? Do you have a say when something like this happens and it's no longer going to be a feature film, but it's going to go direct to the channels? What is your input like there?
Do you have a say? No. What kind of my process with most of the movies that I did is I was usually there for the table read when all the actors sit down and read through the script. And then most of the time on the Disney Channel movies, they had 2 or 3 days of rehearsals before they started filming. So I was usually there for table read, rehearsal, and like the first 2 or 3 days of filming. And then I would leave. A lot of times they were on location and there was only so much they were going to pay to have me around.
Right.
And then occasionally I would get a call, we're on set and this scene's not quite working, or we're going to be shooting this scene tomorrow and we thought we were going to be in a bowling alley, but now we're in a soda shop. Can you rewrite it for the location? So I was still involved in that way. But in terms of day to day, in terms of any ultimate say, in terms of any power, the writer got nothing.
I want to talk about your process a little bit because, as you said, once the script is done, you are there just to kind of check in with them as needed. You don't get a ton of say after the fact. So let's step back into the beginning process of this. For you, as you're writing your screenplays, what does this physical process look like? Are you sitting in a specific location? Are you using specific technology? Is it a long process, a short process? What is that like?
First of all, I'm usually sitting right where I'm sitting right now. This is my home office where we have lived for 32 years. So most of the films you're referencing were created in this very spot.
Wow.
The other thing is I am incredibly disciplined as a writer, kind of more anal than anybody I know who does this for a living. So through that entire period of my life, I would be in this office at 9:30 in the morning. I would write till lunchtime. I'd take an hour break for lunch and come back and write till dinner time. And a lot of that was just, it was so interesting to me through that whole period because friends and acquaintances, when I would do other interviews would say, I'm amazed how disciplined you are. And I would say, it's my job. And then they would, yeah, yeah, but if I was at home, I would this and that. And I would say, do you get up in the morning and put a suit on and drive to work? And they'd go, yeah. And I go, oh, you're so disciplined. You get up and do that. And I said, for me, it's my job. So I go to my job and I do my job. And one of the things I now say to students all the time is write, because if you're writing, there's something to make better.
Yeah.
So, don't give yourself the out of writer's block, or don't say, I'm not feeling it today. Write something, because then there's something to improve on.
I think you and I are the same person. I give that advice to my people as well. And I really like that you have that discipline as you are creating the content that you are creating. So I love that you have a set time to start, a set time to take a break, a set time to finish, and you get that work done very quickly in a disciplined fashion. And I really like that other people had the opportunity to witness you do that as well, so that you could have those conversations, which would then lend into your conversations with your students. Speaking of which, you have stepped a little bit away from writing screenplays and now you're more in the academic field. Can you tell us a little bit about that transition?
Yeah, I had a mentor in the film business, an incredible man named Larry Terman. Larry produced The Graduate, among many other classic motion pictures. And during the kind of the most prolific part of my screenwriting career, Larry was always a mentor. And he was the kind of guy that would just call me and go, hey, we haven't seen each other in a while. What are you up to? What are you working on? Can I buy you lunch? I want to pick your brain. And what was interesting, although we never ultimately made a picture together that got made, we developed a couple of scripts, he was always there. And then in 2001, he called me and he said, I've now been the dean of the Peter Stark producing program at USC. I've been there about 5 years, and even though it's a producing program, I want to add a writing class. And he said, I have a bunch of motives. One is, even if they're producers, they need to know how to talk to writers. They need to have an appreciation of the process. They need to know the language. And I'm hoping I'll also uncover some latent writers along the way that want to be writer producers. And you have always struck me as a natural teacher. Would you want to teach this class for me? And similar to what I said about Spielberg and Lucas, this is another time where you say yes.
Yep.
Um, and teaching was something I was interested in. By that time in 2001, I really felt like I had enough experience and enough knowledge to give back that it was interesting to me. And so I started doing that, and it was one class a year in the fall each year. And everything that you've ever heard about the business in terms of a certain ageist component, a certain new flavor of the month, who's the hot kid this month, you do age out at a certain point. And I was at a point in my career where I was still working, but the jobs I was getting weren't as exciting. There were certain things that I was being offered that I just really did not want to do and was able to turn down. And I came up from teaching that class one night, and my wife said to me, you are so happy when you're teaching, and you have this energy and this bounce and this, you're the guy I married, and you're not always when you're getting beat up in show business. Think about that. And shortly after, I went to lunch with a friend who was teaching at Loyola, and I said, if I want to do more teaching, what should I do? And he said, go to the Chronicle of Higher Education website. And I went there, and not lying, typed in professor in film and television writing, and immediately a posting popped up at UC Riverside, which is 70 miles from my house, and looking for someone that that has film experience and teaching experience. And I went, this guy. And then after a long 6-month process, got that job. And when I first started teaching there, which was a full-time, ladder track, now full professor tenure, the whole smash. When I first started that, I was also the head writer and story editor on a show for Nickelodeon called Toot and Puddle.
Okay.
And what ended up happening, I was then working 90 to 100 hours a week, because I was a full-time professor and head writer, story editor, writing 9 episodes, editing the other 16, being the liaison between the studio and the writing staff. So it was like, no, I don't want to be doing that. And again, I've been very fortunate about the universe talking to me a whole lot over my career. And somewhere in there, my agent called and he said, I'm making a segue into managing out of agenting, so I can turn you over to somebody else here if you'd like some introductions. And I said, no, you know what? I think I'm good. I'm going to kind of step away from that, focus on the teaching, but I will always write. And then subsequently have written 2 novels and 2 plays, so that I can do that kind of writing on my own schedule and my own time on the summers when I'm not teaching, but not be working 2 full-time jobs.
Tell us a little bit about your novels, because I love that you have focused so much of your career in film. But as an author, I always love to hear about a good book. So what do we need to know about your stories?
Well, the first book I did was called That One Cigarette, and it came out in 2017, and it's a counterfactual novel that kind of takes our history from just November of 1963 to January of 2009 and twists it and plays with it and turns things based on four different families that you meet in the opening chapters and don't know how they converge until the very end.
Okay.
Um, so that was really fun, but because it's got all of that historical and factual and interwoven stuff, it took me 7 years to get that done. And part of the delight of it was that was what was so much fun after all the years of screenwriting. That was, we need it Friday and we need 90 pages. It'll be done when it's done. And it'll be as long as it is. It is what it is. And what was interesting, because I was so liberated, is the first draft was like 570 pages or something, and the book is, I think, like 340. And part of it was, once I went back, I put it away for a couple of years while I was department chair. And when I came back to it, there was all these tangential subplots and things where I had just gone off because it was fun to do. And they
Yeah.
were sort of like, they're not driving the narrative, save those for another book, and lifting things out and really focusing on the spine of the story and making sure that was always what was driving it. So, like I said, that was published in 2017. And then I have a new book coming out early next year called Raft. And part of the excitement of that is it's a family comedy. And when I first found the publisher who's putting the book out, they said, we really feel like the audience who grew up on your movies is the audience for this book because it's a magical realism adventure story with a lot of comedy. And they said, all those people that were your fans when they were kids are now young adults with families of their own. You've kind of got to find a way to reach them because I think they're our audience. And so that was how, after years and years and years of stubborn and adamant resistance, I am suddenly on social media with the hope of finding those fans so they will be aware of the book when it comes out next year.
And I love that you come up with such creative ideas for your stories. And I'm really looking forward to checking out your new novel, which is coming out next year. But I have to ask, because we talk so much about books on my channel, because we talk so much about book to movie or screen adaptations, some of the advice that we've gotten is to actually create the screenplay first, then write the novel after to make sure it encompasses what's going to work best for film. For you, since you've done both of these different entities, which has been a little more complicated, a little bit easier, and what advice would you have for somebody who's trying to live in the world of both?
I think it's always about trusting your gut and following your heart, I think is the most important thing. So one of the things with Raft, I had kind of told you before we began, but I don't think I've said for the audience yet. The magical realism component is it's a children's book author who is facing a midlife crisis. His son is leaving for college. His father-in-law just died. He's afraid that everything in his life is now going to be about loss moving forward, and he doesn't feel ready for that. And he tells his wife, the only thing I want before our son leaves for college is to do one last family weekend trip away. And she says, pal, be real. That's never going to happen. Our son's doing this. Our daughter's doing that. We're taking care of my mother. What will we do with her? It's never going to happen. Give up the dream, buddy. And they get in a huge fight. They go to bed angry. And he wakes up the next morning and he's a penguin. And there's no reason. There's no magic. There's no blue fairy that came. And kind of the message of the book is what life is stuff happens and you have to figure out how to deal with it. And so
Mhm.
for this particular family, it's like, okay, dad's a penguin. Now what do we do? And the adventure of the story is trying to figure out, is there a way to get him back? What do we do to save him? He's a penguin in Southern California. I'm not sure he's going to last very long. And
Right.
it becomes the adventure of that. But part of, the process of it that was so much fun was really finding the humor. And then one of the reasons why novel first in this case was the story is told through each of the family members take turns narrating different chapters. So it isn't just 1, 2, 3, 4, mom, dad, son, daughter. It's who's the right narrator for this particular chapter, who has the insight, who witnessed the part of the story I want to tell.
Mhm.
So kind of the process of that was I outlined the story in pretty great detail first, and then went back and like, okay, now if it's this, who's the right person to tell that part of the story? So, like I said, sometimes there'll be a mom, a daughter again chapter if that made sense. It's not the automatic rotation, but it allowed me to really have the right perspective, the different voices. And one of the things that I knew I found the right fit when the publishers reached out to me after they read it was they said after the first couple of chapters, I could have covered up the names and known exactly who was talking because the four voices are so distinct. And another tip for your viewers, if we have a recurring theme, they basically are my family members. So they are voices I know very well. They are perspectives I know very well. And so I think what resonated for the publishers when they found it is they just said, I know all of these people and I love them and I laughed them in every page and teared up at the end. And I went, all right, I've done my job. If I got, if I did those two things, I made you laugh all the way through and almost cry at the end, I've done good.
That's fantastic. And I really love getting feedback as we are creating content because it helps us to make things better, to know what we did well, and to lean into it. So, what advice do you have for people who are potentially looking to get into doing more writing for a production standpoint?
It's really, I mean, the reality of the entertainment business is you're not going to get anywhere without an agent. Very, very few production companies will read from unsolicited writers because it just opens them to lawsuits and other things they don't want to get involved in. And every year it's a little tiny bit harder. So again, one of the things I'm always saying to my students is it really truly is a business of contacts and relationships. And most businesses are, but show business even more so. And so one of the things I'm saying to students is start your network now. Who can you meet? Where can you go? What events can you be at? Who can you walk up to and say, hey, I'd love to introduce myself? And even to find an agent, you're going to be in much, much better shape if my friend's father called and said, I know this kid, I read his script, it's worth taking your time, to read it, than you just sending scripts out blindly going, hey, I'm a writer that wants an agent. It's not going to happen that way.
Mm-hmm.
So it's really about who do I know? How can I meet? Where can I be? And one of the things I do at Riverside, UC Riverside, is I teach a class called The Filmmaker's Life. And the whole reason that class exists is when I was interviewing for the job, I said, nobody ever teaches you how to actually get a job when you graduate. And so what this class is each week I bring in a different panel of industry guests focused on, some weeks it's writers, some weeks it's directors, producers, whomever, behind the scenes, and they talk about their lives and their careers. And I've now taught that class probably 7 or 8 times, and each time it's up to 30 guests. And I've been very fortunate. And again, another lesson, when I was in the business, I was not a difficult human being. I was like to think, a nice person. So almost everybody I've been able to call has said yes, and the only few people who have said no, it's because of scheduling conflicts. But over the course of the years I've been teaching this, we've had Henry Winkler and Ron Howard and Mike White, who created White Lotus, and Bill Fichtner, the incredible actor, and great people have come to the class. And I always say to the students, there's 2 reasons I can get them. I was a nice guy who didn't burn bridges, and people in the entertainment business love talking about themselves. So put out the invitation, they're there. But the point is, when you take all of those stories, everybody has a different way they got in. Everybody has a different story about their first break, their first opportunity, the first job they got. And so the message is there's no path, but you still have to figure out how to create your own path.
I love that. And I'm a huge fan of networking. I work with businesses and entrepreneurs and creators to create networks of people. And so I love that you mentioned that it's really important to start building right now if you want to do anything in any industry, to make sure you have those connections, those relationships, and those friendships. And I know that you know so many incredible people. So, real quick, just take a second and let's do a little name dropping. Who are some of the amazing people that you've worked with?
Well, I'm going to give a headline first because there's such mythology about the heinousness of show business and the awful people that populate it, and absolutely those people exist. But I really will say, through the breadth of my career, which spanned more than 30 years, I met many, many, many more, even top of the line, decent, wonderful, human, terrific people. And starting with Spielberg, there was nobody who was more encompassing, embracing. There was one time where I saw him from afar out in public when my son was with me, and my son was like, Dad, there's Steven. You know him. Go say hi. Go say hi. And I said, you know what? It's a Saturday afternoon. He's out with his kids. He gets pestered every minute. I'm not going to bother him. And he turned around and saw me and went, hey, Stu. And then, to my kid, I was gone, because it's like the king turned and acknowledged you rather than the other way around. But always when I would see him, how's the family? How are the kids? What's going on? Just, a grounded human being. And as I mentioned, Ron Howard and Henry Winkler are in the same category. Just many, many, many more folks that were wonderful human beings in addition to their creative talent. And to be able to sit with those people, to be able to learn from those people, I just felt so incredibly blessed along the way that having those opportunities and meeting heroes that didn't disappoint.
I love that. So, as we are moving forward, I want to know, because you've worked on so many different projects and you have put so much of your life and your family and your relationships into these different pieces that you've created. If somebody were completely unfamiliar with your work, which I highly doubt we will find anyone who hasn't seen your movies, what is the first piece that you would recommend for people to go watch right now, or the thing that they should go rewatch as soon as this interview is over?
Well, it's such a funny question because I've done a bunch of interviews over the last couple of years, and sometimes the interviewers will ask very, very specific questions about specific projects. And the thing I always say is, if you know Sunset Boulevard, I'll say, I'm not Norma Desmond. I don't sit home watching my movies over and over again. So some of them, I mean, one interview was specifically about Smart House, and I had to watch it the night before because I hadn't seen it in 20 years.
Yep.
And I knew they were going to really drill in on things that, I don't know. I've had a lot of life in between.
Mhm.
So I think, and again, you've heard other actors and writers say this, that each one is incredibly special in the moment in particular. And
Yeah.
some of them last longer and some of them resonate more. And, as you said at the beginning, so much of the fan favorite feedback I get is related to Xenon and Smart House and The Land Before Time. So it's hard not to kind of put those at the top of the charts. But then, each and every experience had wonderful things about it, and even some of the things in it didn't come out exactly how I envisioned them in my head. There were still great things that happened in the making of, or new people I met that led to other things. So it's really hard to, you know, this is
Sure.
the thing that I feel is me. I think they're all pieces of me.
I feel that with my novels. I've written over 2 dozen books, and it's really hard when people are, have been very excited about reading my stories and my characters and they ask questions, but I haven't touched that novel in 5 years. And so I completely understand that.
Yeah.
This has been such a fun conversation, and I know you are jumping into social media now that you're preparing to market your brand new novel, which I'm so excited for. Give me all the penguins. This is fantastic. Where's everybody able to reach out to you online to learn more, to see more of your videos, and to hear more about your book?
Yeah. At Stu Krieger on Instagram and same handle on TikTok. So those are the two places. I believe I'm also on Facebook, but I will give a full confession. Because I am of a generation where everything about social media is nothing but terror. I currently have one current and one former graduate student from UCR curating the sites for me. So they are kind of directing the whole campaign. They are doing everything and check in with me when they need new video or new feedback. But one of the other things we will be doing sometime in the early in 2023 is we'll be doing a Reddit Ask Me Anything, which will be an opportunity for folks, because one of the things that's been wonderfully exciting and overwhelming, but there's currently over 6,000 plus followers on TikTok that have thousands of questions that I just can't, go one by one by. So we will be doing the Ask Me Anything on Reddit early next year.
Hit that subscribe and notification bell because Stu is coming back for another episode breaking down his storytelling techniques to help authors and writers level up in what they're doing and create even better content as they are building out what they're doing in their careers. And as always, we're dropping daily videos to help you level up in both your writing and your reading space. If you've got questions down below, or if you have guests you would like to see on the show, drop us a line in the comments, and make sure you check out our other episodes where we talk to animators, other people in the movie industry, and people that can help you level up in your writing careers. We'll see you in the next episode.